All right, let me hit you with a question. What if you could take a property you already own and instead of making, say, $1 in rent, you made $4 in rent? Same house, same location, same everything except one tiny change that unlocks way more money and way less stress. Now, does this sound too good to be true? Well, that's exactly what has happened to me with my newest short term rental. I call it the farmhouse. I turned the keys over to a company called Corzly, and they've completely, I'm telling you, blown my mind. They handle the guest, they handle the money, they handle the pricing, they handle the headaches, literally everything. And here's the kicker: I'm making four times the revenue I'd get if I was renting this place for term. Four times more. Now, today I've got the guy behind all of this here on the show. His name's Tim Hubbard. He's the CEO and co founder of Corzly. Now, his company's managed over 50,000 guests across 10 countries and more than 30 cities. And on top of that, he's built his own 70 plus unit short term rental portfolio while living abroad and traveling wherever he wants to go anytime, anywhere. So, if you've ever wondered how to make your rentals produce more money with less of your time, this is the episode for you. Welcome to the Raising Private Money Show. This is the only podcast for real estate investors who want to fund their deals without relying on banks, relying on credit, or using their own cash. I'm Jay Conner, the Private Money Authority, and I'll show you how to get private lenders begging to fund your next deal because every good deal starts with the money. You're going to meet my good friend Tim Hubbard right after this.
If you're a real estate investor and are wondering how to raise and leverage private money to make more profit on every deal, then you're in the right place. On Raising Private Money, we'll speak with new and seasoned investors to dissect their deals and extract the best tips and strategies to help you get the money, because the money comes first. Now here's your host, Jay Conner.
Oh, my lands, Tim Hubbard. I am so excited to have you here on the show. I had you on my show last year, but then I said, you know what? Using your company, I want to see just really how good you and your company are. And boy, have I got a story to share now with the farmhouse and how I'm getting four times the revenue I would if I hadn't have met you and your amazing team. So, Tim, welcome to the show.
You very much, Jay. I am excited to be here. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. And we're really excited to have had the opportunity to help you with the farmhouse. It's been an awesome start.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, we just launched it this year, back in January, the fourth week, and I'm telling you, it's just blowing up. So let's go ahead and give everybody the big picture. How in the world does Corzly, your company, take a normal rental and turn it into 3 to 4 times the revenue, for goodness sakes?
Well, there are a lot of pieces that go into that, Jay. It starts with having a good property that's in a desirable area. But I think one of the interesting things that we've seen over the last few years is that there's lots of properties all over the place where people want to stay. And it's not your traditional vacation rental market anymore. It's just the way people are traveling and living is different. People are staying in short-term rentals more than they ever have before. Um, and so it starts with just having a property and understanding the market dynamics of that property, and then understanding who's going to stay there at the property. And then, of course, on the back end, there's all these other pieces of the operation, which my team and I have figured out over the last decade, starting with my portfolio, as you mentioned, and I've lived thousands of miles from my properties. And so we figured out how to do this virtually. And we've kind of just gone from there. So, we've got an awesome virtual team, and we're truly experts in the space.
Yeah. Well, one thing, and you and your team helped me figure out so much. I mean, I didn't know who my target market was going to be. You all helped me figure that out. You all helped me figure out what I should do to the property in order to maximize the revenue. You all figured out the pricing. I mean, I don't know how to, price a short-term rental. So your team handled all the pricing. Your team goes in there 3 times a week, and they don't just rely on software. I mean, they physically, with a real human being, are using the software, and they're checking the pricing to make sure everything is, competitive. And it really, truly is a hands-off experience. I mean, the only thing that I've had to do with this short-term rental to get a 4x in the revenue is have the housekeeper, is to have the housekeeping company. And you all actually told me how to find the housekeeper, because I mean, I didn't even know where to start on how to find a housekeeper. And so, and when we were starting out, you told me, your team told me. So here's the actual dollars, just so the audience and listeners can understand. This house, it's a 4-bedroom, 2-bath. One thing you all told me to do is to advertise where it can sleep 10 people, and that's true. One of the bedrooms, it's got 4 bedrooms, and one of the bedrooms, we've got 2 bunk beds in there. So that's 4 of the people, in one of those bedrooms. And so this, if I was doing just a straight long-term rental on this house, I'd be bringing in about $2,200 a month on that rental. So, 2 times, so it'd be under 30,000 a year. And I remember having a conversation with you and the team before I actually decided to pull the trigger. And I said, what is an anticipated revenue, realistic revenue on this property? And you all analyzed, the demand and the supply around in the area. And y'all told me realistically 60,000, maybe 80,000. And man, Tim, y'all are conservative on your estimates, is all I can say.
Well, that's great to hear. Under promise and over deliver, right? That's what makes businesses success. And
Exactly. Yes, I was
yeah,
just
I
going to say,
just
on this property, I'm 4xing, what more than 4xing than what I would have been doing just on a straight rental. So is this common? Is this out of the ordinary? I mean, yeah, I mean, you and your company have managed over 50,000 guests on all these. By the way, how many properties is your company virtually managing in 10 different countries now?
we're around 200 now, but we're growing quickly and all with good results.
Wow. 200 and it's virtual. By the way, let's go
Mhm.
ahead and let the cat out of the bag. Your all's fee for taking care of this blows me away. I know what but you don't have any competition. I don't know any other company like yours. I mean, there's some big name short-term rental companies out there that, are charging 25% all day long on the revenue. But just let
Mhm.
everybody tell them what your fee is, and don't go up.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, yeah, that's the whole idea, is that, we figured out how to create efficiencies on the back end. We call it a partnership because it really is a partnership, and there is a little piece that we're not handling. That's the piece you mentioned, where we're relying on our partners' housekeepers. We've realized that that's one of the trickier pieces. If we were to hire people in all 30 cities where we're currently helping our partners with properties, it'd be a lot more difficult than it is for us just to handle all the operations on the back end. Also, coordinating the housekeeper. So it's not that we're not handling the work there, but it's just the actual finding housekeepers. We realize that's one of the pieces that on a global scale is a little more challenging. And so, aside from that, as you mentioned, we handle the whole operation, and we know that we charge an industry low fee. And that's the whole point. We want to pass those efficiencies down to our partners, take away the headaches, help them make more money, and really just become the the global go-to virtual manager. The days of having to go with your local property manager that's 20 or 30, or there's some places, Jay, where it's like 40% still,
Wow, wow.
uh, and that's been the traditional way in the short-term rental space. But we have so many tools now. Of course, you got to know how to use them and where to plug them in, and how to set them up and do all that. But those tools have helped us create efficiencies, and we pass them down to our partners. And
Yep.
just to go back to your question about, is this normal to make 4 times more on a property? I will tell you, when I started, what really got me just, light bulb went off. I had these long-term rentals that I converted to short-term rentals, and they were making 8 times more than the long-term rental.
Wow, eight
And so
times.
8 times. This is, of course, like almost a decade ago, so a lot's changed. But I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the fast track, and that's what really got me interested in the short-term rentals. And it's, of course, gotten more challenging because the supply has grown in a lot of places. But that's one of these easy things that we can figure out before. We can look at a market, we can see how many properties are there, we can see how many have been added, and then we can look at another number that tells us if the demand has stayed on par, if it's gone up, or if it's actually gone down. And as long as we have a market where we're adding tons of properties, again, because there's way more people using short-term rentals, as long as we're in that market and we don't see that demand or the average revenue going down, and that's fair game. And yeah, I think across the board, the short-term rental is going to make a lot more than a long-term rental would in almost all cases, assuming the property's in a market that makes sense to start off with.
Right. Tim, you and your team handle so many aspects of this. I never have to talk with a guest unless I want to, right? Um, so I got guests that just checked in yesterday. They're going to be there for 90 days. Gross revenue over $23,000 over the next 90 days. If I was doing a straight rental, that would have been 22 is 44, $6,600 I would have grossed versus $23,000. And so I don't have to talk to them unless I want to. But boy, I wanted to talk to these people. We took two great big bags of food up there to them, and welcoming
Oh,
them to the
awesome.
party and to the house. And we made a party out of it. But your team through a special app communicates with the housekeeper and tells the housekeeper, when somebody's checking in, when somebody's checking out, and all that kind of stuff. You communicate with the guests, and your team is phenomenal at getting the guest to leave a rating and leave a review. So let me tell you a short little story that I experienced with your team and the phenomenal job that they do. So, you advertise the farmhouse, my property, on all the different platforms. I mean, you got it on Airbnb, you got it on VRBO, you got it on bookings.com and all that stuff. And so I just a few short weeks after, and I started with you and I had no ratings, I had no reviews, I had like nothing, like nobody knew who the farmhouse was. And in just a few short weeks, I got a congratulatory message from Airbnb congratulating me and my wife, Carol, with the farmhouse being a superhost. And I looked at Carol Joy and I said, "What's a superhost? I guess that's a good thing to be a superhost." So tell everybody, what is a superhost, Tim, and how do you get your partners to get to be a superhost on a property so quickly? And what's the effect of that?
Yeah, it's a great status, and I guess it's even better, Jay, when you get it and you don't even know how you get it, right? That's
I,
the nice
I didn't know
piece.
how I
So
got it. I didn't know what it was, but it was a good
yeah,
thing. I know it
well, we
gets I
know.
know it gets you a lot more exposure on Airbnb.
Yeah. Yeah, so we know, of course, how someone gets the superhost status. And there's actually another status that Airbnb has now that not as many people know about. It's a guest favorite badge. That's property specific. Superhost status is a host status. So if you had a whole bunch of properties, Jay, you could have the superhost status across your whole portfolio of properties. It's basically some extra verification that Airbnb does that says, hey, this host has great reviews. They don't cancel reservations. They have a really fast response rate, and they have a certain amount of reviews. And so those 4 things, as long as you meet them, they evaluate you on this every quarter. And then, as you mentioned, if you get it, it of course gives you a little extra visibility on the platform. And that's really the name of the game, is getting more visibility on the platforms, and standing out against the competition. I mean, it's people aren't spending a lot of time anymore doing research, or they're basically just swiping through on the phone. And so we want to grab their attention in the beginning. Having Superhost status is going to help your property stand out. And so yeah, glad that you got it, and sooner than later.
Yeah. Well, one thing you just mentioned was how quickly a host responds to a guest question or a request, or a maintenance issue or any kind of communication. And you know what's interesting is that your team communicates with the guest as though they are me and my wife. They're talking. Well, it depends on the communication. Some of the communications they'll say, "Hey, I'm such and such, and I help Jay and Carol manage their properties." And then depending on the communication, sometimes it's coming across as just Jay and Carol. Like the thank you for staying with us. We loved having you, and that kind of thing. But one thing you mentioned is how quickly that response happens. And one thing that just blows my mind is, I don't have to be looking at my smartphone making and worrying about missing any notifications from guests, because your team and your receptionist desk and support team, you all are open 24 hours a day. And so if somebody needs something, you're right there your team is right there responding to them. And just based on my own observations of these communications, it seems to me that all the requests that come in from a guest, there's responses coming to them, people, like most of the time in 5 minutes or less.
Well, that's the magic number. 5 minutes is our internal rule, that, our rule is to respond with all of our guests in 5 minutes or less. And so that's it. Yep. And it really does make a huge difference. As someone that travels a lot and stays in short-term rentals a lot, I know sometimes, and I stay in places for an extended periods of time as well. In fact, I'm in a short-term rental right now as we're doing this recording, for about a month. And I know before I book a place for a month, I send out a few inquiries. It's a place where I'm going to be spending a fair amount of time, and I want to, just verify some details, make sure the internet works, all those fun things. And I know the faster someone responds to me, the more likely I am to book that property. And then after I'm there at the property, if I have a little issue, and I don't get a response for, even if it's 30 minutes or an hour or something, if it's an important thing, that goes right back to my review score. So we understand all these things from the guest perspective. We understand them from the owner's perspective. And we've incorporated them all in to do, as you said, try to get, the best reviews possible, and also get as many reviews as possible.
Oh
So
yeah, and you know what I love doing, because you have actually put my short-term rental company on automatic and autopilot. I love just reading. I love just reading through those reviews. Now,
mhm.
Tim, let's talk about your journey here. Let's talk about your journey. You have built an amazing 70 plus, over 70 unit portfolio, and they're all short-term rentals, right?
I've got about 45 of those are short-term rental, but we're building 20 more. So um, yeah,
So you got a lot. You got a lot
there's
of
quite a few. Yeah.
short-term rentals. So how did you pull that off? I mean, how do you go from, yeah, how many, so were you a traditional landlord, and you had some properties and you just converted them over to short-term rental like all at once, or how did that start?
That's right. Yeah, I started investing in 2010, so luckily I got in right after the last crash. I was working in real estate part-time investing. My first property was a fourplex. So I'd read Rich Dad Poor Dad, sort of had that cash flow philosophy in mind, and I was building up my own portfolio. I worked for a software company for about 8 years, and I was doing real estate at the same time, and started acquiring units. And I was traveling a lot too, Jay. I always loved traveling. I was really fortunate when I was in high school. I got to go live with a family in Spain for a summer, and it just totally changed my outlook on everything. I realized, like, every place is really different. The foods, the sounds, the smells, the people, the culture. And so I wanted to be able to travel a lot. And so I got into real estate looking for passive income. Um, but it takes a while with long-term rentals. And so I had built up some long-term rentals. I think I had about 12 at the time, or maybe 15. And I was I'm from California originally. I was looking to invest outside of California because the prices had gotten really high and the returns weren't that great. So I was staying in a property in Tennessee. It was a short-term rental, an Airbnb, and I was out there with these investors, looking at these turnkey rental properties to buy as long-term rentals. And I knew the prices, I knew how much they were making, and I knew how much I was paying to stay in this short-term rental. And I looked up the cost of the property that I was staying in. And then after calculating what I was paying and what the property was, I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing's making way more money than these long-term rentals are going to make. And so I took some of my own properties, converted them over to short-term rentals, and just really haven't looked back. I after those first, I converted 4 units over in another fourplex that I had. It was in a good location. I still have those today. They're still operating, still doing really well. And then I found an 8 unit apartment building in Tennessee, was all long-term rentals. I converted the whole thing over to short-term rentals, and I kind of just kept doing that. And so um, a lot of my properties are in urban areas. They're smaller multifamily properties, but I'm really excited. I'm down here in Colombia right now, in Medellin, Colombia, and we've been building this small boutique resort for like the last 3 years. But these will be 20 individual short-term rentals. So I'm really excited about this one. I think that's the cool thing about short-term rentals. You can have a property like yours that's on acreage. You can have an urban inner city property. You can have a property in another country in a tree house. Like it really doesn't matter. If you do a really good job at marketing it, and you do a really good job at making sure the expectations are right, that leads to really good reviews. And if you have really good pricing set up, people are going to find it, assuming you're on all the right channels. And it's just a lot more fun, I think, than long-term rentals. So yeah, it's been quite a journey, but I feel like in many ways we're really just getting started.
You just mentioned marketing. That's another thing that your team takes care of is the marketing. And what I mean by that is like of course, I had to send you pictures. I had to send you the pictures and I have a great video. Of course, Airbnb, I don't think lets you do video, but some of the other platforms let you do video. But I sent you the pictures, but your team put together the whole listing. They wrote the description, they wrote the copy, they did everything in order to get that property found, recognized. I even remember the headline that your team wrote for when people are searching, and due to the keywords, your team knows knows what words and copy to use for people to find your property or find a property when they're looking for that area.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a big part of the setup, making sure that your listing, your property is attracting the people that would actually want to stay there. And so, we have a number of resources that we go through and do some market analysis, and it's a really important piece of the puzzle
Yeah.
for sure.
One thing I mentioned earlier. Oh, by the way, I've got so much I want to talk with you about in case we've got any listeners or viewers that have got to jump off. I want them to go ahead and find out now, and we'll continue the interview and conversation. But I want them to go ahead and find out now how to find Tim Hubbard and Corzly. Of course, we've got all this in the show notes. But so if you're listening to this, you can go to the URL, which is go.jconnor.com/short term. That will take you right to Tim's onboarding and contact information. So again, that's go.jayconner.com/short term. And that'll take you right to contact information with Tim. In addition to that, if you happen to be watching this on YouTube or Facebook or LinkedIn, we're going to put up a QR code that you can scan. And there's the QR code right there that will take you directly to the contact information and getting more information about working with Tim's company. So we were talking about the marketing. That's important. So Take a moment, Tim, and walk through what it is that makes this work. And what I mean by that is part of, pricing. Pricing is so important. Walk through how it is your team analyzes the pricing multiple times a week. What are they looking for? How do they know what to bring it up to, what to bring it down to?
Yeah, great question, and really, really important one. Um, and I guess real quick before I jump into that, Jay, a lot of the way that I explain what we do now is we kind of break things into three departments. We have our listing specialist department who do just what you just said. They create the listing, they make sure it's in the right spots, they make sure it's speaking to the right guests. And so that's sort of one internal department. Then we have our guest experience department who's handling all the questions, making sure that they have really fast response times and that they're, coming from a hospitality background, which we do. You can do both those pieces perfectly, but if you don't get the third piece right, which is pricing, no one's going to find you, no one's going to book your property, and it's not going to be a success. And so that's our third internal department is our revenue management team. And we spend a lot of time, of course, when we start with a partner's property, analyzing the market, uncovering how many properties are there, how quickly that's growing, what the average rates are, and not just across the board, but what the average rates are for a 4-bedroom, because that can be very different than a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom. We look at, the average length of stay that someone would stay there at the property. And then we know that that also changes. So maybe you're in a place that's seasonal and the average stay in the high season is 3 nights. But then when winter rolls around, people stay there for a month at a time or even 3 months like yours. So we look at that average stay. And then we look at another piece, which is really important. And this is what we call the booking window. So when someone finds your property, the amount of time that they reserve it ahead of the check-in, that changes throughout the year as well. So maybe you have a really high season where your property is. We know that booking window is going to be longer. People want to reserve those spots, and so they're booking it out further in advance. We know that when you have events in town, or maybe your property is really well suited for Thanksgiving or Christmas, and that weekend or that week gets booked. Well, that specific date has its own booking window, its own pricing, its own specific length of stay. And so you can really get into the weeds on this stuff. And that's what our team does. We look at all this market data. We use a lot of tools for this. Luckily, we're able to pull data from all the short-term in the world, really, in any market. We can look at averages. And then the way that we know our properties, our partners' properties are doing a good job is how they're performing against like properties, so a comparable comp set in the market. And so we look at how your property is doing against the market on a regular basis, and across multiple timelines. We can go, there's so many other things we could really go into. You got to consider reviews, you got to consider like how long the listing's been there. But these are all things we're considering, and that's the third piece of the puzzle.
Yes, it's so fascinating, so fascinating. You talk about special events, and I remember when I had the first conversation with your team about pricing and how we were going to price and what's the bottom price, going to be, and that kind of thing. And I remember them telling me about when, special events play an important role in what pricing should be. So like in our area, only 5 minutes from the farmhouse, once a year, the first weekend in April, we have the Newport Pig Picking Contest, which is the largest pig barbecue cooking contest in the nation. So, the software and the team, elevates pricing there. And then you mentioned holidays and like Thanksgiving. So here's a word to the wise, a word to the wise. So it was back in June, a few weeks ago. My wife, Carol Joy, and we were saying, well, wouldn't it be neat to block out? And, that's one thing you can do as a partner. You can block out personal time at your property, if you want to. So we said, well, wouldn't it be really cool if because the farmhouse was built in 1929. It's actually my grandparents built this house. My mother was born in this house. There's a lot of history to it. It's I had it plaqued by the Carteret County Historical, not hysterical, but Historical Society. And so it's the plaque there on the front porch and all that. And I said, wouldn't it be cool if we blocked out Thanksgiving weekend, or at least Thanksgiving Day, and the same 20 or 25 of us have been getting together for Thanksgiving for the past 25 years, and we could go up to the farmhouse and have Thanksgiving. Well, don't you know, less than a week after that conversation, somebody booked the farmhouse for Thanksgiving. And I said, well, I'll take the $2,000 instead of a one lunch party. So,
Yeah, yeah, yep.
so word of the
Or
wise, when you start having Corzly, Tim's company and team, virtually managing your short-term rental, if you really want to use it down the road, you better go ahead and block it out, because I can tell you one thing you don't want to do. You don't want to be starting canceling reservations, because that's going to drive your reviews and your ratings down right away. Right, Tim?
that's right. That's right. It's a big no-no.
Yep, exactly. So what are some of the, and you got a bunch of experience on this, what are some of the common mistakes that property owners make trying to self-manage versus, using experts such as yourself and your team?
Yeah, good question. I think there's quite a few. A first one is I would say most people, Jay, when they start in the short-term rental space, they start with Airbnb because it's the easiest. They have the most protection. Airbnb has their own liability insurance and things that can protect you on the back end. But we know because Airbnb is the easiest platform to be on, everyone's on it. But there's millions of travelers that are using other platforms like Booking.com or Google or VRBO even that aren't maybe on Airbnb. And so I think that's a big one, is making sure that you're on all of these listing sites to really to market your property as much as possible. And so that's the first one, is just going on all the listing sites. Most of our partners that we bring on, we find that they're not on booking.com. And we do, by the way, we work with partners like yourself that are just getting started. We'll create the listing for you. And then we've also taken over people's portfolios, that already had all their listings, and we'll help optimize them and make sure everything's in the right spot and kind of take over the wheel. But assuming someone goes on booking.com, it's a completely different set of policies than Airbnb. And so a lot of people run into trouble not collecting payments the correct way, or maybe they collect a payment that gets canceled, but then someone still checks into their property. And so when you come off of Airbnb, you've got to look at all these different things, the policies, the way that you're taking payments. You've got to make sure that your property's covered. So you want to make sure you have a deposit or some sort of additional protection. So that's a big piece. I think being on the right listing sites, but also knowing how to be on them and knowing how to verify guests. And then I think maybe the big one is like, we just don't know what we don't know, And so if you're if you're new to the short-term rental space and you don't have tens of thousands of guests of experience, there's just all kinds of things that you're not going to discover until those reservations come up. And if you're managing, maybe 3-4 reservations a month, or maybe you do 25 a year, like you could have a nice year go by and then something happens that you would have never expected and you don't know how to handle it. And so we know how to handle it. And then just the last thing I'll say is that let's say you go through that year and you have 25 reservations and you get 25 5 stars and you think you're doing really good. A lot of people that start out in the industry, they have that success. They can get the good reviews, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they've maximized the revenue potential with the property. It's most of the time they're not pulling it up and comparing it to market data. And so if you finish the year at $50,000 and you're really happy, but your neighbor finished at 75,000, then you're still falling behind. So yeah, there's a few examples.
Right. Let's take a minute and talk about the future opportunities. Where do you see short-term rentals in the future compared to traditional rentals? I mean, have we hit maximum, capacity for short-term rentals, or is it still a wide open opportunity?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think we still see markets growing. Like the US on average is growing like 4% now in terms of new supply per year. During, the post-COVID era, it was growing like 20%. Everyone was getting a short-term rental and a vacation rental. So it's still growing. And I think that there's still millions of people that are still discovering short-term rentals for the first time. And I also believe that it's just a new way of living now. So we know that Airbnb, one of their fastest growing segments are longer reservations. Longer short-term rental reservations, or what we'd call a midterm stay reservation, just like the one that you just got at your property. And so the difference between a short-term rental and a long-term rental, in my opinion, is merging a little bit. And people are staying in them more, they're staying in them longer. And I'm excited about the future, but it definitely has gotten more competitive. And it's there. I come from the long-term rental side of things, and property management with your long-term rentals is equally as important. And there's this saying that I've kind of kept with me for a long time that I heard somewhere. It's basically like, I would rather have a Class B property with Class A management than a Class A property with Class B management, because you'll have more headaches and you might end up making less money. And so the management really is important. And I think as we progress into the future, it's going to become even more competitive in terms of
Well,
management.
which makes it even more important to have experts like yourself and your team to partner up, with owners of property, like I have, because I mean, I've been investing in real estate. I've been raising private money for years and years and years. But like you said, what I don't know, I don't know. I know a lot about raising private money. I know a lot about flipping properties. I know a lot about buying houses subject to the existing note and selling them on rent to own lease purchase. But I didn't know anything about short term rentals, which there's a big takeaway right there. You better do business with somebody, if you're brand new, particularly, that knows what they're doing and who does know what they know. So if someone's listening to this show and they're really interested in this, how do they find out if their property is a good fit for short term rental? I know that's one thing you all helped me figure out.
Yeah, that's a really important question. I think the first thing would be just ensuring that your city or the county or wherever your property is located actually legally allows short-term rentals. We know there's a lot of regulations, and Airbnb's got a whole bunch of the regulations on their website. You can Google these days, just Google your city, your county, make sure that first you can operate a property as a short-term rental. That's the first piece. And then the second piece is there's a company called airdna.co, and all they do is all they do is statistics on properties. You can plug in your address on their website and they'll give you an average of what the market is earning. And you can break it down by bedroom size, bathroom size. You can put amenities on there. Do you have a pool? And of course, it's all by location. And so I think that would be the second step. Just jump on there real quick, plug in your address. And if that's close to what you would expect, or it's somewhere in the ballpark, then I think it's fair game. Because even within those, we know their averages. So there's someone that's making way more than the average. There's also someone that's making way less. So
Yeah.
that's how I'd start.
So, Tim, if someone listening here to the show has a property, they're interested in this, and let's say they handed you and your team a property today, what's the exact first steps Corzly would take?
So first step is just making sure we understand the property as well as the owner. And so we have an onboarding form. It asks for all the questions we know we're going to need answers to. It's very thorough. We'd like to be really thorough up front so that we're not asking you questions, on the back end or 2, 3 weeks later, we don't know how to respond to something. So that's really the first step, is just us getting information. And then if it's an existing listing, we'll help optimize it, make sure it's on all the platforms. If it's a brand new listing, then we're going to take all of that information. We're going to create a listing as a draft version, also under your account. I think that's a big one too, Jay, because a lot of property managers, traditional property managers, own these listings, but we don't work that way. So if you ever wanted to leave us at any point, Jay, you can take your property, you can take your Airbnb listing, and you could sell the property, or you could do whatever. So we help create it under your account, in a draft version, and we have a quick call together, make sure everything looks good. We get the green light from you, and then we start handling it. It's really pretty easy to get started.
I know what my phenomenal experience was as far as how fast we could get up and, generating revenue. And I know that the answer to this is all over the board, but generally speaking, depending if some certain things are in place, which you can identify, how fast could you have a property live and generating income?
Yeah, so it's a good question. There's a couple stages to it. So Airbnb, right now we're at 3 days, from the moment that we have all the information. So that would include photos, but we're getting faster. And so pretty soon, that'll probably be 2 days. But that's for Airbnb. That's where we start. And of course, this is plugged into all of our software in the back end. It's connected to your locks, your pricing setup. We've got our operations software connected with your housekeeper. All the pieces are in place, 3 days after we have all your data. Of course, it does depend a little bit on how many partners we have joining us. If we've got quite a few at the same time, then we go in order of who joined us. But typically 3 days, and then shortly after that, we'll have it up on VRBO. And then shortly after that, we'll have it on Booking.com. We'll have the direct booking website set up. And then really, we've kind of finished the process. And of course, we'll be monitoring it from there on a regular basis.
And listen, for all of you that have not had a short-term rental yet and you really don't know where to start, let me tell you what Tim's team does. They sent me a checklist of everything that needs to be in the house. I didn't know everything that needed to be in the house, a furnished short-term rental. So I mean, even down, to the coffee cups and the Keurigs and the types of linens. I mean, we've got 3 sets of linens for each bed. That way, that way our housekeeper can take it home. They can be washing the linens. And then if there's an accident and you got to throw out some linens, they've already got a backup to the linens. Tim told us all that. In fact, Tim, your team actually even told us the exact kind of security cameras to buy, which were not that expensive. And I mean, I actually have a good time stalking my guests as they walk in and out of the door, But the security cameras, your team told us the exact kind of locks to put on the front door. And that's all automated through the apps. And your team assigns a specific security code to the guests that are coming in. And so now not only myself as the owner, but your team who's managing and looking at what's going on with the property, they're able to see, and I'm able to see who exactly left the back door, who came in the back door, who went out the front door, who came in the front door. And all that has got historical data. So if something goes wrong at the property, you know exactly who was there when something happened. So your team just fills in and answers all the questions of I don't know what I don't know.
That's right. We've I read this book recently called Fall in Love with the Problem, I think is the name of the book. And it was written by the founder of Waze, the competitor to Google Maps, billion-dollar company. He's actually built multiple billion-dollar companies. And that's his whole philosophy is like, you need to fall in love with the problem. We fix the problems, which is it's hard to operate a short-term rental. We know it is because we've operated our own for a long time. And that's our mission, Jay. It's like making all of these things that are more difficult easier. And by doing that, we get to work with more partners all over the place. And yeah, then everyone's happy. It's a win-win.
I love it. I love it. All right. I gave it out earlier in case anybody had to jump off early, but here one more time. Here's how to connect with Tim and his team, right? And so the QR code to scan we've got right there on the screen. So there's a QR code if you're watching this on YouTube, Facebook, etc. And if you're listening, of course, all this is in the show notes. But if you're listening, the way to connect to Tim to get that special white glove treatment like I've enjoyed is you go to this URL, go.jayconner.com/short term, and that'll take you right to Tim. Tim, parting comments. I'm so excited about your service and my farmhouse. I could just keep talking to you all day long, but what are your parting comments, and I'll wrap us up.
Well, yeah, it's been a pleasure working with you, Jay. I know our whole team's really excited to bring on properties really from anywhere. This is one of the cool things about being virtual. Every property is unique. It has its own unique market. But behind all of that, there is a professional way to operate it, and that's our mission. And so we'd love to help anyone that's interested.
Thank you so much, Tim. All right, that's a wrap, folks. Here's the big takeaway. If you've got a property, or actually if you want to invest in a property and you've been renting it the old school way, let me tell you, you are leaving money on the table, like a lot of money. I've seen it. I've now experienced it firsthand with my farmhouse. Same property, same location, but instead of $1, I'm making $4. And the beautiful thing, I don't lift a finger. That's the power of what Tim and his team at Corzly are doing. They're not just managing short-term rentals, they're turning them into businesses that run without you having to be hands-on. So if you've been listening and you're thinking, man, I want that for my property, then here's what you do. Go over there, check out go.jayconner.com/short term. And check them out. Reach out to Tim. His team will be right there ready to talk to you. Have a conversation. And listen, at worst, you learn what's possible. At best, you unlock a stream of revenue you didn't even know was sitting in your backyard. Tim, thanks again for dropping by and dropping some serious value today. And to everyone listening, don't just listen to this, act on it, because the only thing standing between you and a property that prints money is the decision to hand it over to the right operator. And the right operator is Tim Hubbard at Corzly. Until next time, I'll see you guys on the next episode of Raising Private Money.
Are you feeling inspired by the knowledge you gained in this episode? Then head over to jayconner.com/moneyguide. That's jayconner.com/moneyguide and download your free guide that shares 7 reasons why private money will skyrocket your real estate investing business right now. Again, that's jayconner.com/moneyguide to get your free guide. We'll see you next time on Raising Private Money.